My name is Arfan Hanif. I'm the Chief Executive of Touchstone. Right, in terms of how I describe myself is as a human being. That's my first foremost identity, and being a human being you need to be considerate, respectful, have empathy for other human beings and show compassion. So that's the first starting point in terms of how I describe myself. And in terms of leadership, I don't actually like the term. Leadership suggests a few who know what to do and the rest follow. And a model of leadership, it's done more harm than benefit to society if you look at history, and it's a few individuals who have made decisions which have led to where we are. So I don't believe in the concept of leadership as such. I believe in the concept of all human beings have the potential to do great things, and there are certain things, barriers, which have been created by the few, which do not allow the many to fulfill their full potential. So I don't really like the term leadership. And if you want to describe how I approach my work as a chief executive, I would say it's non-hierarchical. And I can give you a simple example. I don't have an office or a desk, or I don't have somewhere someone needs to come and see me. I will go to a person or a member of staff. I will go to you, because part of my job is to serve. You know, I'm no different than anyone else. So, but part of that is being non-conformist. I don't follow others. I don't follow the traditional stereotype of what a leader is, how you need to act, and so on. My approach is also inclusive. I need to ensure that I bring people with me. It's about enabling others to become leaders or reach their full potential. And in terms of my approach in terms of decision making, it's consensual. I need to get the views of all whilst making a decision. But generally speaking, I don't class myself as a leader, and I don't like being called a chief executive. I have a name, I'm a human being, I have a certain period of time on this earth, and I will try my best as a human being to do good things in a very simplistic way. Others might approach leadership from a career perspective or a status perspective. I don't. I have no motivation whatsoever. So to some extent I'm a reluctant chief executive. Like most things in society, whether it's mental health, education, housing, the economy, there are certain disadvantaged outcomes for certain groups. Even more so when it comes to health inequalities, because that literally can be in someone's life. And for me, mental health, it's not a chosen profession. I don't come from a professional background, no background in mental health, psychology, or even social care. My only qualification in mental health is a lived experience of mental health, having been sectioned under the Mental Health Act, being detained, having a community treatment order, all of those things. And those were experiences. And in a way, that was an education. Whilst that was going on, I was noting how the system operated, and one of the things I immediately identified, which reinforced what I knew already, was the racial inequalities in the mental health system. So if you look at secondary care, where I was sectioned, more than half of the people who were sectioned were black, minority, ethnic, or of a racialised community. They do not represent 50+% of the population of this area, yet they were overpopulated. And many were brought in by the police, which included myself. Not we've done any crime or anything, but a punished way of bringing into the system. It felt wrong. Something didn't feel right. And when I went into the pathways of primary care, it still didn't feel right at all. It felt like we're doing something to you. And when you come out of it thinking, that is awful what I've just witnessed, something, you know, if I had the power or a position to do something about it, I'll do it. So by accident, as a service user, I came to the Touchstone, the organisation which currently employs me, and that gave me an insight in terms of, well, this is how you need to treat people, because when I arrived, I was treated as a human being, and the first 3 people I saw were people of colour, from different backgrounds, someone from a Pakistani Muslim background, someone from an African Caribbean background, someone from a Chinese heritage, that immediately I felt at home. It didn't feel like clinical. And also, the view I take, it might be a bit crude, certain professions have been in charge for decades. Why are we still in a mental health crisis? The psychology model that exists, or Western psychology, is recent. Medicine is not the cure, clinical is not the cure, it might contain the issues. So I felt there's an alternative to this, and part of my thing as a leader in mental health is to promote this social model and social justice within mental health. As CEO, when I did become CEO, my priority was based on my lived experience, not based on any professional view, whether it's psychology, social care or mental health support. And it was about the inequalities and the social injustices within the system, similar to many systems, but something had to be done. You can either be passive and say, well, it happened to me, I'll move on, or you do something about it. And Touchstone gave me the opportunity to do something about it. And I'm an advocate of the social model. I recognise the clinical model has a role to play, but for decades the clinical model, the psychological model, the Western approach to mental health has had primacy. So why are we still in a crisis? Why is so many inequalities? And why are certain groups still more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act? It's like any system, it's run by people. And if the people are not representative of the people they serve, then there's an issue. So what you've got in the mental health system is you've got senior decision makers which do not reflect or represent the communities that they serve. So the first thing you need to ensure is the workforce in the mental health system a representative of its diverse communities? When you get that right, the service delivery bit becomes a lot more easier. So Touchstone, I often say to people externally, my focus, the first and foremost, is making sure my organisation is representative as a workforce and also in terms of volunteers, and that then is reflected in our service user profile. So if you get people from various communities who work for you, you can adapt things. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a couple of examples. One example is we're quite radical in terms of adapting the CBT therapy for this Muslim community. We've done that, and it's uniquely what we've done working with the local NHS trust. The second area is a few years ago we innovated working with black-led churches where we adapted things. So it's about how do you adapt, but the only way that was possible was you had people from those communities. You have got a Muslim woman who's pushed the agenda. You've got a black African Caribbean woman who goes to church who's pushed that agenda. We also had a Roma project a few years ago. Another question was posed, how do you get into the Roma community on your project? Because we've actually appointed people from that community. Get that right first, because if you come into a building, if people don't look like you, you may not have that trust. So that's the first thing. There is no equity without representation. Get that right first, and most organisations don't. So that's an important thing. And in terms of health inequalities generally, yes, it's important because there are various groups in society which suffer from health inequalities, whether it's through deprivation, poverty and so on. Now that covers a lot of groups, whether it's to do with class, gender, whether it's to do with being a veteran, whether it's a person who's got a substance abuse issue. It covers a range of people, and when you do that you dilute it. You've got shrinking budgets, and what you've got then, you have to decide where should we focus our resources. And what happens is groups who are not representative, who may not have political representation, for example the Bangladeshi community, they will have less say in terms of how much they might get. So what happens is in squeezed resources, and you mainstream something, you dilute it, and actually nothing really benefits. and you're not really tackling the underlying causes. You've moved on to a new agenda called health inequalities, yet have you tackled the historical issues of health issues amongst black minority ethnic groups in the past? So we've moved on to something assuming we've already solved something. Well, you haven't solved anything, and in a way it's a backward step, because the figures do suggest there's far more disadvantage for racialised communities, not only in the mental health system but across the health system. Touchstone traditionally had a lot of black minority ethnic projects and services, the way things were commissioned. They shifted, say, 5-6 years ago towards a mainstream approach to commissioning, references to health inequalities, and all of a sudden the figures in terms of representation of black minority ethnic groups reduced significantly. So we were criticised by members of the community, and I said, it's not my fault, it's the way they funded it. If we don't get this service, someone else will deliver it, you will still not get what you want. So that's been really, really difficult, and I've raised that a few times in meetings and so on, and continue to do so. And in Leeds, we're lucky, we've got allies, there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of individuals within the mental health system who are doing their utmost to make sure that this issue of meeting the needs of racialised communities is not lost. And we're very proud in Leeds, we've got Synergy Leeds. We make sure things are on the agenda. However, that needs to translate into how resources are actually allocated. So it's all good and well saying the nice words and the statements, and a CEO from a trust saying, I'm really committed to diversity. Well, if you are, where are the resources for that? So I often get asked, where do you find time and capacity to look at diversity and inclusion? My response is, it's the first thing I look at. Not from your perspective, it's a legal and ethical perspective. I see it's about people. I know my people, I know my staff, I know my communities. Do you know your customers? No, you don't. It's not about the language of equality and diversity and inclusion. It's about, do you know the people you are serving? So it gives Touchstone a competitive edge, because the world is diverse. You'll be left behind. So it's making sure through allyship, meeting the right people, and in meetings you slowly, bit by bit, but until we get decision makers, CEOs who are from racialised communities as CEOs of NHS trusts, and key decision makers in local authorities, unfortunately I think there'll be very little change. So we need more people from racialised communities in decision making roles where resources are allocated. Now, I work for the charity sector, so I'm a recipient of whatever gets funded. All I can do is influence, and we need more people within the system who are making decisions to allocate resources. And I'll be brutally honest, the meetings I've been in where there's been discussions about resource allocation, there have been predominantly white people. But when there's a meeting about equality and diversity, let's get mixed people. Well, the key issue of equality and diversity is not a meeting about equality and diversity, it's resources. So when people talk about equality impact assessments, the first thing you need to look at is resources. It's resources that make the world go round. So when you don't talk about equality issues and finance and resource issues, then you're missing a trick. So we need more decision makers from diverse backgrounds and possibly with lived experience when it comes to the allocation of resources. All I can do in my role is to influence. They can either listen to me or not listen to me. However, if there's more people like me from diverse backgrounds, you're more likely to have that change. And it's going back to my earlier point, equity is only possible if you have representation, not only in employment, but also in key decision making when it comes to the allocation of resources. A person's lived experience makes the person. Like many people in life, I have traumas. So by the age of 10 years old, 3 key traumas: racism. The P word was just regular, just every day. If you're lucky, you probably didn't get a punch. I was every day, on the way to school, in school, on the bus. the P word, so racism. Also been a victim of domestic violence as well, so up to the age of 10, that was the experience. And I've also been a victim of sexual abuse. So by the age of 10, a child is traumatised. By the age of 14, my parents were planning to do a forced arranged marriage, so I got a forced marriage by the age of 16. These are all traumas. Now, I can either see those as negative, disadvantage, and thinking, yeah, what an awful life, and I can cry, or I can say, okay, these are experiences. What has it taught me? One thing it taught me very, very early on is I distrust authority. The people who are supposed to care for you as a child, whether it's down, when I talk about authority, it's from the family right to the state, the institutions of authority. So to some extent, I have a healthy distrust of authority. I had to, because people in positions of authority weren't protecting, they were harming. And that is still the case for many, many people, especially for racialised communities. So I have this particular view of distrusting authority in a very healthy way, because do not show deference to those who have power. Always question what their motive is. So in a way, that has sort of enabled me to become who I am from my lived experience. Yes, I went to university, but I didn't take a vocational course like, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a lawyer. No, I did a degree in political science. I wanted to know how the world worked. I wanted to know how these structures operated. Finally did an international relations MA. I wanted to know how the globe operated and the power structures around that, and to be equipped. And when I left university, to give me some basis of reality, I worked in a factory for about a year. I eventually did some anti-racist work. Back in the day, there were some things called race equality councils in different areas. I was a race equality discrimination caseworker and so on. I was not interested in working for companies that are motivated by profit making, unethical type of thing. So the voluntary sector. So I was very much an anti-racist practitioner. I wasn't interested in anything else. And then I ended up in local government, thinking I'm going to change the world. But all I did was give them the language to hide behind. So I was there when the Racial Relations Amendment Act came out, the Lawrence inquiries, all the buzzwords, quality and race equality impact assessments, institutional racism, 22 years later, 24 years later, where are we? So this is where my cynicism comes in when people talk about it's a new agenda. We've not sorted out previous agendas, they're being left. So all of this has enabled me to have a better grasp and understanding, and then in local government, understanding our processes, and it didn't feel right. A lot of bureaucracy, and I felt, right, I had to shift out of there, and that, in a way, did contribute to my mental health. It felt like I didn't belong. It wasn't me. I couldn't change the world that I wanted to change. I thought, if I go into the system, will I change it? Many people have tried. It's very, very hard to do so. Then I ended up in Touchstone, but before that, in the hospital experience and the mental health journey, the pathway that I went through. And that has allowed me, those experiences, if you add it all together, it gives you a very broad view. I'm not sort of loyal to a professional restricted view of the world. I see the bigger picture, and how I approach my work, I think global, but act local. That's the way I approach things. I understand how things, the international dynamics of politics, economy, how that might impact in terms of where we are as a society. And that gives me this sense of having a broader strategic view of things and not having a particular lens, you know, I've got a psychological lens, or I'm a doctor, I've got this lens. I have no lens. I'm not loyal to any of those. So I see a very broad perspective, and that enables me to be the person I am. I can then be non-conformist. I can be hierarchical. I have a certain view of establishment and authority, both from a lived experience, but also evidence suggests that. People who are disadvantaged, either due to their ethnicity, social class and so on, they suffer that trauma and that and it's well documented. In terms of my view of a future vision, It can't be done by individuals. To tackle some of the big issues, say for example racism within the health system or the mental health system, that requires significant leadership, and that can be only done collaboratively. And when I talk about collaboratively, it's not only communities coming together, the voluntary sector like Touchstone, it's our colleagues in the statutory sector. There are good people within the statutory sector. There are people who are committed, and it's about working with them, supporting them, and how can I support you in your role as a statutory leader to get what we feel is the outcome for communities. So a collaborative vision where we all take common responsibility and accountability for it. It's not the responsibility, it's a diversity lead, it's the diversity champions. No, it should be the responsibility of all. If you get this right, it benefits all. It's not just a minority issue, it's about how you treat human beings with respect, how you may need to adapt a service to meet their particular needs. That applies to all human beings. So if you get this right, you actually end up with a better service. But with that collaboration, it requires resources. And if you are going to tackle this issue of racism and inequalities within the mental health system, the only way possible is the vision. You can have a vision, we need to collaborate and tackle this issue, we need the resources. I can do my bit as a chief executive to some extent, but whoever listens to this, hopefully some senior decision makers who are commissioners, do they fully understand the potential impact of decisions when they allocate resources? And have they spoken to the right communities? And are they aware if they give to one, it might give the perception that others would lose out? And there are certain perceptions in the communities, because when you have certain projects for a particular community and you don't give it to another, it gives that almost neo-colonial sense of divide and rule in our communities. Why do certain groups get X and we don't? And we need to tackle that divide and rule approach when it comes to resources. Get rid of that. In a way, it's better if no one got anything. At least that's equality, it's equity. But ideally, if you're going to approach it, you need to approach communities as a collective. Yes, there are differences and cultural adaptations that are required, but you need to ensure that these are racialised communities, and one thing they've got in common, we like to divide, they've got a different language, they eat different. One thing we've all got in common is our common experience of racism, disadvantage, exclusion, and that ancestral experience of racism. That bonds us together. And that's the key thing, part of the vision. The communities need to unite. What happens, the commissioners like, oh, I like to speak to the community leader of X community than an X community. They like that. What we need to do is collectively come together with one voice and say, this is what we want. Stop speaking to us at separate times and giving X money and someone else different resources. No, we are one collective. And as a collective, we want to get rid of discrimination and racism in the system. Simple as. That's the one thing we want. And until our communities unite, it was the case in the 70s, of a strong sort of anti-racism, the concept of black being a political notion, there was unity. But successive governments have used various policies to divide communities, both economically and socially. So it's time now for communities to come together to recognise we have a common bond here. Yes, we might be from different parts of the world and different heritages, but we have this common experience. Why are we in this country as people of colour? We have one reason, that is due to the British Empire and colonialism. That's the reason why we exist. And until we unite, and then the system needs to change, that's the vision. And it's quite difficult because our communities are fragmented. And in a way, that's been successive policies, which have not only gone back decades, but centuries. And the commissioning system, to some extent, plays into that. It might seem harsh, but this is how I see it, and these are some of the things that members of the community have also told me. What wakes me up and motivates me every day, despite the stresses of work, in simple terms, mental health is the industry of misery. If you want to give it an industrial sort of name, it's the industry of misery. You deal with people's lives where people are not happy, in simple terms, for various traumas. So that can take a lot. But when you know you're doing something right, you're not being motivated by profit or anything. You know, it's the alignment of the head and the heart. That's the key thing for me. I want to make a change to people's lives due to my own lived experience, but also coming from a minority group who knows what oppression is. I don't want to be part of the problem. I can easily be passive, chief executive, get my salary, look at me, I'm doing well. I don't want to be part of the problem, so I want to proactively tackle that. And what motivates me is not the outcomes as such. I live by my values. I get many things wrong as a human being. I might probably make a lot of wrong decisions, but I've set values. So it's not the ends, it's the means for me. If your means are right, it doesn't matter how the outcomes leads to the outcomes. And the other thing that motivates, which I've not really mentioned, is I'm a Muslim by faith, and that gives me strength. And that was, if you ask me how I came through my mental health, it wasn't something that was earthly. It was something else, which I'm very, very grateful for, which gives me grounding. I may not practice, I'm a secular person, but I very much link myself to what is the universe. I'm part of the universe. And when you align yourself to that, you become very, very powerful. Not in a material sense, but something spiritually. That is the most important thing for me. What will happen. As long as I do what I do in line with my values, I might not control the outcome, but at least I've determined I can pass away with some solace to say I did something in contribution. Some of the great leaders, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. Now, yes, they did great things, but America's not changed. Well, people still remember their method.